peripheral things. A couple rangers were following me around, as is normal. And I'm talking to concessionaires because in a park, the concessionaires will talk to you, the rangers will not, at least on the record. And at the end of the night, I went back to my lodge I was staying at. I get a knock on the door. A couple people in plain clothes are there. They said, hey, Mr. Politis, we know who you are. You do some great investigations. We want to give you some information. They come inside and they tell me a story that they are 2 national park rangers, worked at a series of national parks during their career. And during that career, they had seen a lot of missing people, which isn't unusual. What is unusual in their mind was that at the front end, there would be a big push to find the people. Significant. At the rear end, after 7 to 10 days, you wouldn't hear about it anymore. There would be no more investigations, no more publicity, and they couldn't find information about it after that. And they said that's unusual. And the number of missing people under certain circumstances concerned them greatly. So as that evolved and they talked to me, they said, somebody's got to be looking into this. Nobody on our end is, nobody on our end will. So can you please look into it? I said, okay. The next day I call a couple law enforcement types. I give them the information on the ride home. Within an hour they said, Dave, there's something here. There's a lot of people missing from a few national parks that we checked. And they seem to fit a tight profile. That's how this all started. The Bigfoot story yesterday flushed that toilet because you're not going to hear about Bigfoot anymore, okay? There's some people that like to merge the 2 topics because I've written books about them, but I've never attached the 2, I've never related the 2, and you're not going to hear it here. For you guys, this is going to be a news release. Tonight on Coast to Coast, I'll be on for 4 hours. George Knapp is a superstar. And the reason that Knapp is better than almost everybody else is that the guy prepares endlessly. He really does read the books. He asks me questions. We prepare at length. And so when you want a professional job done, George is a friend. We've worked together. I've probably done 7 or 8 meetings with him. He knows what he's doing. And tonight is going to be something that we're going to talk a bit about right here. I won't let it all go, but I'm going to let you see some things that nobody else has seen. Hopefully it'll be stimulating, and it is a bit scary. So when you're doing research, you gotta work with a profile that you establish over time. After reading thousands of missing persons reports, we came up with this profile. There's gonna be a certain amount of people that fit the profile that have disabilities or injuries. And on the opposite end, there's gonna be a group of people that are highly intellectual. People like me in the middle were never taken. It's not true. They're taken a minute amount of times, but it seems to be that in our cases, you're either at one end of that intellectual scale or at the other. Canines, a lot of people disappear with dogs, and when we bring bloodhounds to the scene, 99% of the time or more, they can't track or they can't find a scent. Sometimes the dog will walk in a circle and lay down. Sometimes the dog doesn't even want to walk to the scene. And as someone who's worked with canines my entire law enforcement career, I can tell you these dogs live for finding the scent and working at a scene. And they're not interested. If people are found, they're found near creeks and rivers, sometimes in dry creeks and river beds. There's a geographical clustering in mountains and near water of the people. Berries somehow are inextricably involved in many of the disappearances. Huckleberries are involved, and huckleberries, strange thing, there's a real negative aspect to people that were picking huckleberries and disappear. More times than not, they're never found. Swamps are common in many disappearances on the East Coast. If the people are found, 1 or 2 things happen, and I don't know what. They either can't remember what happened to them, or they don't want to say what happened to them because they won't talk. If they're found, when they're found in a semi-conscious or unconscious state. If they're unconscious, 9 times out of 10, they're face down on the ground, which is a strange way to find somebody. Many times they're missing clothes and shoes, and if they disappear, 90% of the time it's in the afternoon before nighttime. If they're found in a location that is previously searched, sometimes searched as much as 100 times. Sometimes it's on a trail that the searchers were walking out on every day. And bad weather and a change in the weather is associated with the disappearance more times than not. What's the common denominator here? Anybody tell me?
They're all Democrats.
They're smiling. They all look well
Having
educated.
a good time.
They all look well educated.
What's the verse? So,
There
Nick's.
is nothing.
They are all physicians.
Oh.
They all disappeared, all in a mountain or rugged setting, and all of their stories are unbelievable if I told them to you. Let's start in the bottom right. Michael von Gortler. This happened about 10 miles from my house. I know this story intimately. Michael had a daughter, Michaela, that was a junior at the University of Colorado Boulder. He was an emergency room physician in Boulder. He had a house in the mountains right near Mount Missouri. He loved the mountains. He loved his daughter. He and his daughter went for a 2-day escape at his place in the mountains. They told family and friends that they were going to climb Mount Missouri. The man was prepared. He was extremely smart. He knew the outdoors. He knew the weather. He picked a day that was perfect. No wind, no clouds for 25 miles in any direction, and they climbed Mount Missouri. They didn't return that night. And Michaela and Michael were divorced. Michael's wife and he were divorced. When the daughter didn't call the mom that night, she called search and rescue. They found his vehicle at the trailhead to the mountain, and right away they initiated search and rescue. The search lasted for 7 days. They brought in Cobra helicopters. It was an all-out huge effort. And Mount Missouri is a huge mountain, and there's nothing on that mountain except rocks and boulders until you get way down in elevation. And every day they'd fly a specific route to the mountain, and they'd drop searchers, and they'd fan out, and they'd look. And every day they found nothing. The 8th day they're ready to quit, flying the same route in as they're getting ready to land. They look down, and right in amongst a clump of trees, they find their bodies on the 8th day. And the bodies had damage to their faces that was extreme, and not a lot of damage to the rest of the body. They both died of skull fractures. When the sheriff was interviewed about what happened, he stuttered and stumbled, and he couldn't answer the questions. They said, how did these people end up here? How did they die? How did they fall? He says, those are all great questions that I can't answer. And the reason being is that it was a calm day. There's a path up to the summit. There's not steep sides to this mountain. How did you miss them for 7 days? All these things could not be answered. You multiply that times every one of these cases up here, and that's exactly the kind of thing that happened. And it can't be explained. And the sheriffs and the coroners that look at these cases are dumbfounded. The case on the second from the left on the top, James McGrogan, a very recent case. Another emergency room physician. He's from Indiana. He went to Vail, Colorado, about 20 miles from my house, and he went with 4 other physicians. They went and they were going to cross-country ski on a path and camp overnight at a hut up in the mountains where people do this all the time. It's a path that's been worn by 1,000 skiers. You can't get lost on it. It's very, very profound. It's in the snow. He stops with his physician friends, and everyone's tired. They're at about 10, 11,000 feet. He goes, hey, I have some energy. I'm going to take off in front of you. I'll meet you at the next hut. An hour later, they arrived at the next hut. He's not there. They wait. Well, he's carrying GPS. He's carrying a huge backpack with supplies. He's going to be okay. We'll go to the next hut and meet him. He's not there. Now they know something's wrong. They turn around, they go back, they notify search and rescue, they start the search. Same kind of thing. 7 days. Vail Search and Rescue comes in, superstar group of people. They can't find any tracks that leave the main track. There's no avalanches. There's nothing that they can figure out that happened. They're dumbfounded. Day 8. A reverend from the local Vail church is at the bottom of a waterfall that's frozen, and they find Jim's body there. Severe facial trauma, died of a skull fracture. The sheriff was interviewed again. He goes, I've got to ask myself, how did he get 4.5 miles in the wrong direction and end up here? And he had GPS? I have no idea. The other case that I'll briefly talk about on this page is right here. Elliot Blakesley, a large woman. She was a physician at the Snake River Correctional Facility. She was a former colonel in the Army Reserve, retired. Again, a big woman. Her and her significant other, also a big woman, went to Crater of the Moon National Park in Idaho. And as the relatives said, they would not walk out of view of their car because their dogs were in the car and they just wanted to take a short walk into the park. That short walk, they disappeared. One wasn't found for 7 days, one wasn't found for a month. If anybody's ever been to Craters of the Moon, it's one of the roughest environments you'll ever hike in your life. It's beyond rugged. It's like walking on spires of glass. She's found 1.5 miles from her significant other, and that was 7 months ago, and the coroner still hasn't released the cause of death. Therein lies another issue on this. McGrogan died of a skull fracture. Von Gortler died of a skull fracture. 6 of these others, they couldn't determine the cause of death. And that is an unusual aspect, because dealing in law enforcement and dead bodies my whole life, coroners know how to find causes of death. And when they can't, it's a really unusual thing. Here's an example of the kind of thing you'll see when there's something unusual. Dr. Walzak, an MD, PhD, 62 from Bedford, died November 21st, 2009 on Mount Washington from unexplained injuries of his head and body. Stop right there. So, you're the law enforcement, you're the ranger, you're investigating this death, and the best you can come up with is, I don't know how he got his injuries. Sustained while hiking. He was found in the morning of December 22nd, 2009 in Sergeant's Purchase after his wife's desperate attempt to send him rescuers to him after he failed to call her between 4 and 5 p.m. on November 21st. The time is a direct hit. The woods hiking, direct hit. Unexplained injuries, direct hit. Man of intellect, direct hit. Why hasn't somebody found this or ever keyed on this before? When you look at the back of my books, I keep an index of all of the people that have disappeared that I write about in each book. And what I talk about is that there's a hopscotch effect across the US of these cases. So McGrogan dies in Vail, and then 4 days later, something like this happens in the Adirondacks. Who's ever going to put the pieces together that something like this and this unusual is happening? This is just about McGrogan. I actually, just before I got here, Cara Bettis, I talked to her about this case. Something unusual that I said right at the beginning is that many times the people are found without shoes. Mark my words on this, shoes are a key to these disappearances. McGrogan was found without shoes at the bottom of a frozen waterfall in the middle of winter. Why? Again, I kind of filled you in on this. Common denominator, anybody tell me on this?
You're pretty athletic.
Athletic. Everybody really up here on these lists is pretty athletic. So every morning I get up, I run 4 to 5 miles. Every morning, except this morning. But every morning I do. And I run on a Life Fitness treadmill every morning. I never know why I did it, why I didn't. It hurt my back sometimes and my knees when I was running on hard pavement. But after I start to do this, I know why I'm not running outdoors. All of these are long distance runners that disappeared. Some world class. Victor right here ranked in the top 20 in the Ironman triathlon, finished. Famous guy. All of these people disappeared while running. Mika True was a famous trail runner, really famous, in Outside Magazine 10 times. What's that?
Caballo Blanco.
Yeah. He was running in New Mexico when he disappeared. They found him laying in a creek with his shoes off. Way off course. Jeffrey Boucher is a more recent case. Outside of Toronto, in a city called Whitby, right on the Great Lakes. Every morning for 20 years, the man got up. He was a science teacher. Got up at 5:30 in the morning, rigorous, and took off and went running. He didn't come home one morning. His wife calls the police. Police come out, and he lives right on the edge of a wildlife area. Well, the people look for him for 7 days. They don't find him. They search the banks of the lake. They don't find him. The lake is frozen over. There's no breaks in the ice. A month and a half later, after he's gone, they find one of his shoes up on an embankment of the lake about 50 feet away. A day later, they find another shoe on the beach. Another day later, they find his body up on the beach. Cause of death? He didn't drown, unknown. Andrew Jarzik, the only case up here that I'll talk about that didn't happen in a rural setting, but it's worth talking about because it fits the profile for everything else. He lived in New York one night, and he ran every day. And he got home after going out with some friends at 1:30 in the morning. He put on his running stuff, and he went for a run along the river. And they have videotape of him running along the river at one spot. A mile later, videotape picks up, he's not there, he's never been found. Jonathan Ajay, the bottom left, there's an area called the Devil's Punch Bowl outside of Los Angeles, about 20 miles in the mountains. He is a LA County sheriff. Every day he went running, and he decided to take a trail run in the Devil's Punch Bowl. Disappeared. LA County sheriffs pulled out every stop you can imagine to find one of their own guys. They never found him. That was 8 years ago. He's never been found. Michael Lemaitre, that story is in North America and beyond. In Seward, Alaska, they have a race called Mount Marathon. And it's not a marathon, but it's just as soon be. You leave Seward, Alaska, which is on the ocean, and you run up to the top of this mountain called Mount Marathon. It's about 2,500 feet straight up, and then you come down the other side. 65 years old. He was the last guy to reach the top of the mountain, and there was a race official there saying, hey, you want to stop? He goes, no, I'm doing good, I'm doing good. They confirmed he was there. The race official talked to him. He went down the other side. The race official went down the other side, disappeared. Huge search. Anybody watch the show Alaska State Troopers?
Yes.
They devoted a segment to this disappearance, and they talked about how peculiar it was. They flew their helicopter over there, they figure 100 times with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, looking for body heat. They saw 2 bear. They never found his body. They never found a scene where there was an attack. Canines never picked up a scent. He's gone. I talked about Boucher. Ajay talked about, this is This is another thing. This is the area where he disappeared. Lots of boulders and not a lot of area to hide. Boulders are a big part. I don't know why, but they are. Talk to you about the Mount Marathon race. Mika's disappearance. Tenny, this is interesting. This is a good example on the right of what the topography looks like in the areas of many of these disappearances. It's barren. There's not a lot of places to hide. It's hard to believe somebody disappears there. And if it's a winter disappearance, they don't show up most of the time, even in the summer after the snow melts. It's a very strange. And this is Tenny. That's actually the area where they searched on the top right, the mountain on the left. He was in Park National Park, P-A-R-Q-U-E. That's another thing. So at the beginning when we started this, we thought that it was national parks in the United States that this predominantly occurred in. But then it is extended to Canada. But in the last 18 months, we've got the resources now to look into other countries, and it's happened in other national parks in other countries. And the people that have read the books, I get emails all the time, and they say, well, Dave, don't you think that's kind of strange that national parks in other countries have the same profile that we have of these disappearances? And I do agree that that is strange. And a couple people have said, well, I wonder really what was the source behind everyone having national parks. Somebody's thought, not mine. This is another strange story about a little boy that walked away from his family. He was fishing with them. And there's two stories I know like this. It's almost as though, and I don't want to be quoted about this later, but it's almost as though somebody's watching and waiting for opportunity, and then they strike quick, and they're 100, as one of my other partners said, Dave, they're 100% successful. And the reason they're 100% successful is that we've never heard a report about what's doing this. So whatever is doing this is 100% successful. Danny's fishing. His campsite's 100 yards away. He goes, hey, I'm going to go back. I'm going to get some supplies. I'll be right back. He goes, never comes back. Huge search. And this boy is found thousands of feet up the side of Mount Baldy on almost like a cliff face, dead. And at the time, the coroner said, I think he died of exposure. That's kind of a catch-all. Garrett Bardsley, this is just outside of, it's in the northeast section of Utah, the Uinta Basin near Kuberant Lake. Anybody ever read the book, The Hunt for Skinwalker?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is about 150 miles southwest of that ranch. A lot of strange things happen in these mountains. Garrett, fishing with his dad, acts in the morning, slips, gets his feet wet, says, hey, I'm going to go back and change my socks. There's still 10 other people sleeping at the campsite. His dad goes, no problem. His dad watches him go from the lake, down the trail, into a grove of trees. The campsite's on the other side of the grove of trees. Half an hour, 45 minutes goes by. He doesn't return. His dad goes back. Garrett never got here. Huge search. And 300 feet up above where this campsite was, they find one of his socks. They never found this boy. And again, it's in one of those high altitude areas where there aren't many trees at all. And there's been several disappearances in this area in the last 25 years. But every other time, the kids are found, eventually. Now, 2 years ago, I made a presentation in front of the largest search and rescue organization in the world, NASA, North American Search and Rescue. Thousands of members. And I talked about these things, and I said, you know, coming from the law enforcement side where I've done a handful of search and rescues versus going out all the time like you guys do and doing search and rescues, I never want my paradigm about looking for somebody to change or get worse over time. I always want to have the opinion that the person will be found. If you were a search and rescue person and you go out on 100 of these searches and rescues and 10 times you never find anyone, pretty soon you're going to grow the opinion in your mind that it's possible we're not going to find the person. The reality is that you should find everybody. Unless it's a water-related disappearance, everyone should be found. You've got planes and helicopters with FLIR flying every search and rescue scene just about in North America. See body heat on the ground. You have canines that come in and are looking for scent. You have trackers that are looking in the dirt at signs of what direction the person's going. And then you have people that break up areas into quadrants, and you search a quadrant and then move to the next quadrant. With all of this, we should be at 100% effective rate. Now, what I asked that audience, I says, if you have a 2-year-old that's missing, how do you determine when you stop searching? If you were the parent of that 2-year-old that disappeared, how do you come to reconciliation in your mind when it's time to quit searching? Sorry. With what I know, I would not stop searching. And the few times when I've met a parent that lost a young boy in the woods, they all felt the same way. Because there shouldn't be a reason to stop searching. What the people come to in their minds is that, well, based on weather conditions, the boy couldn't live, so we'll stop searching. You know, maybe it snows 10 feet, just as an exaggeration. He can't live through this, so we'll stop searching. But then in my mind is, so the next summer, why can't we find him? Because you have cadaver dogs that smell rotting flesh. We should be able to find that. So the paradigm on search and rescue, I think I've always thought this is flawed. And the reason behind this is, every place you go in North America, 90% of the searchers are what? Volunteers. 90 to 95% are all volunteers. Meaning they have to go out on their own and get their own training, and they're all motivated at a different level. There's no professional search going on for anybody. In national parks, they bring in county search and rescue people that are supervised by national parks people or county sheriffs. These are not big professional searches. And everyone is handled differently at a different professional level. It's a very archaic way to go about something so sentimental to us and so important to us. I've always thought that the training we put into, say, U.S. Forest Service firefighters or smoke jumpers, maybe those people should go to the search and rescue and get advanced training, and those ought to be the people that handle it at a professional level at different areas. Because after you read the 1,200 cases that I've documented, you'll see that something's wrong. This is brand new. You've never seen it before. You're the first group to see it. This is the brand new cluster map of North America. Now, I had one before. This has been a huge, huge effort. The biggest cluster in the world, Yosemite National Park. Think of boulders, think of massive granite. I can't tell you why it's occurring there, but it does. The new addition to this cluster that blew our minds after we finally mapped it all is right here. What is that right there? Bingo. Water and the Great Lakes. There's an old book called the Great Lakes Triangle. Anybody ever heard of it? Somebody, one of our researchers, found it and started reading it, and the number of people that have disappeared, boats, and airplanes around the Great Lakes is like a second Bermuda Triangle. I never heard about it before. And now with the number of missing people that we just mapped around the Great Lakes, unbelievable. And the clustering effect going around the lakes. This is the Adirondacks region. Pennsylvania has an enormous amount of missing people. Area around Great Smoky Mountain National Park, the border region between Arkansas and Oklahoma, northern Colorado, southern Colorado, two of the biggest clusters, Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Washington, right down the Cascade Range, numerous clusters. There's 12 different people that have claimed that our map matches their map. The latest one was a Bigfoot sightings map of the US that people had us overlay.
Correlate with UFO sightings?
Yes?
Do you have a theory?
No? Yes?
Have you ever thought of working with Joe Congo?
Joe and I had lengthy conversations. He's a brilliant guy. And the last conversation we had is that is going to happen. And the last thing he said to me is, this troubles me greatly. I gave him a copy of the presentation and we went over the whole thing, and he says, this is bothersome. Sir?
Is there any correlation with native legends? Do any of the tribes in those areas have any comment on this, or does this tie into any of their stories?
So there's been a couple books about, see, I'm big on Native American. I spent a lot of time in Native American reservations. And they believe they came from the Star People. And there's been books written about that. And a professor, I think from Montana, I forgot her name, wrote a great book about it and explained this. And when we were in tribal areas researching Bigfoot, do you know what we heard all the time? We always heard that they see things in the sky that they don't like to talk about. And that's consistent across the US at different reservations. So when I was a policeman, I had a friend that I worked with for 3 years, high profile cars in a bad crime area. We were best friends, worked the toughest cases. At the end of 3 years, I'm getting moved on to detectives. He goes, hey, I'm leaving. I go, yeah, I'm leaving too. I'm going to detectives. He goes, no, I'm going to the FBI. I go, well, you're kidding. I go, put the handcuffs away. You'll never need them again. He says, I know, but I always wanted to do it. So, and he ends up being a special agent in charge of a state. He just retired. And he and I have these conversations all the time. And he's read my books and he goes, Dave, what can I say? There's something here, you know, obviously. But to your point, the FBI is the smartest group of law enforcement agents in the world at compiling data. They're the best report writers in the world. They're the best profilers in the world. If my child went missing, that would be the last group of people I'd want looking for him, because they don't have field experience like a law enforcement officer from a city. But I would want them involved. I wrote a story in the Eastern book on the disappearance of Dennis Martin from Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Parents were lied to by the National Park Service, blatantly lied to. Lied to by the FBI, blatantly lied to. And every other federal law enforcement institution that played a part in that case lied to him. And how do I know? Because I have the documents. Mr. Martin's one of those few people I proactively came to because I knew this man had just been walked through the rawness of life. He's about 75 years old now, and he's still in phenomenal shape, a really, really smart man. I knocked on his door. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just flew out to Tennessee from California. He opened the door. I quickly stated who I was. I said, I doubt there's anybody in the world that knows more about your son's case other than you and me. And I said, just give me 15 minutes of your time because I just have a few questions. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Dave, this has ruined my wife and my life, losing my son. It's changed my life. And a couple years ago, we made a decision not to ever talk about it again. because it just gnaws at me like you can't believe. And I said, just give me 5 minutes and 3 questions. He steps outside his house and he goes, you got it. He ends up giving me like a half an hour, 45 minutes. Really, really nice man. And I told him what I knew about his son's disappearance. They're up on a field backpacking on Father's Day. He, Mr. Martin, his dad, and his 2 sons. And they're on a field. And they're playing, they're running around, doing what kids do. And Mr. Martin and his dad are sitting in a couple easy back chairs. They're in the middle of nowhere. And the Appalachian Trail goes right through the middle of Spence Field. And as they're playing around, another family comes up and puts down their stuff and says, hey, can our kids play together? And he goes, sure. And he goes, oh, my name's Jim Martin. And the other family looks at him and goes, we're the Martins too. That's the first strange coincidence on this case of many. I always ask Mr. Martin, I go, is there any relationship there? You ever get spooked by that? He goes, I thought it was weird, but I never put much into it. So the kids start playing together, and they're playing together no more than 10 minutes, and they decide to play hide and seek. And Mr. Martin says, I watched Dennis go about 40 feet from me, right onto the edge of the wilderness, and go behind a bush. After about 30 seconds, all the kids are yelling, hey, 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 come on, everyone, come out. Dennis didn't come out. And it was right next to the Appalachian Trail. He says, I ran to the bush, and he said, I ran nonstop down the Appalachian Trail for 2 miles. I never found my son. And right below that, 2 miles away, and 2,000 feet downhill, is a family called the Key family, K-E-Y. And they asked some rangers, they said, hey, where can we go to see some wildlife? And they say, hey, go up here to Rowan's Creek, and there's a lot there. So this family walks up this creek, and they see, the 12-year-old sees something darting between trees. And he tells his dad, he goes, hey, it looks like a bear. And his dad says, that's not a bear, that looks like a man trying to hide from us. And at that time, they described the most god-awful loud scream they've ever heard in their life. Louder than anything they've ever heard in their life. And then the thing disappears and they leave. The next day on the front page of the paper is this big disappearance about Dennis. And this family, the Key family, another strange coincidence because this is the key in the case. The Key family says, well, I'm going to call the FBI and tell them what we saw and go out to the park and explain to them. And they call the FBI and it says, hey, we'll meet you at the park. The FBI says, no, we'll meet you at your house. I'm the FBI agent. I want them at the park, showing me exactly where they were, exactly what they saw, the distances, and I want to be the judge. That made no sense. They meet with the family. The FBI poo-poos everything. The National Park Service agent with them poo-poos everything. So they go home and they kind of feel stupid. Well, Mr. Martin had a deal with all law enforcement that if they had anything, they were to come to him immediately with it. They never came to him with this. Until 3 weeks later, a reporter happened to hear third hand about this and proactively went after the family and heard the story and wrote it up and redacted something very important from the story that was in the newspaper. So Mr. Martin hears about it. The tracker from the Park Service and he walk the distance, find out they can make that distance even though the FBI agent said, hey, you could never make that time, it's irrelevant. Park Service agent says it's irrelevant. He and the tracker do it. And the tracker says, no, this is right on. I asked Mr. Martin a series of questions just like I ask all people right before I'm culminating an investigation. I say, hey, is there anything I should know that's not in the newspaper that isn't in public documents about this incident that would really shake me up? He goes, yeah, you know that Key family observation? I said, yeah. He says, you read all the articles? Yeah. He says, why isn't that in any National Park Service report? I said, I asked him 3 times because I figured that they just forgot to send it to me. They wouldn't write it up. I says, is there anything else about that? And he says, yeah, do you know that the Key family said whatever that was up on the hill was carrying something on its shoulder? Not in any report. And the newspaper didn't put it in their article. And he says, and you know the FBI agent? I said, yeah, Jim Reich. He was on every, Agent Jim Reich from the FBI, was on every disappearance case in the Rocky Mountains. And there were several that I write about. He's on every case. And he's not investigating, he's monitoring the case for the FBI, meaning he's writing up information, sending it to Quantico, and they're putting it into their system, just like you asked. He goes, do you know what happened to Jim Reich? I said, no. Committed suicide. And I confirmed that. Looks like I've got to get off, so I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.